In 1971, Wang Ming, the former Politburo member of the Chinese Communist Party from 1928 to 1945, the head of the Chinese delegation to the Communist International Comintern from 1931 to 1937, the leader of the Bolshevik Internationalist faction of the CCP, the second most popular faction in the CCP, wrote a book called Mao's Betrayal in Moscow, 1979. One must note that at this time, Wang Ming left for Moscow in 1956 for medical treatment and would never return, and so has been in Moscow for over 20 years at this point. Now, what I'm bringing up today is something of great importance. In Wang Ming's book, he says that Mao Zedong once advocated a line of cooperating and forming a united front with the Japanese and Wang Jingwei against Chiang Kai-shek, and of cooperating and forming an alliance between the Soviet Union, Japan, Germany, and Italy against Britain, France, and the United States. Let's see what he says. Quote, in October 1940, Mao publicly came out in favor of an alliance between Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, militarist Japan, and the Soviet Union, and inside the country, an alliance with the Japanese aggressors, which amounted to national treason. Here's how it happened. One October night, a comrade from the Xinhua Bao, the Yan'an newspaper of the CCCPC, which appeared every 3 days, came to show me the content of the following day's issue. I was then chairman of the CCCPC press commission and was in charge of the Xinhua Bao. My attention was drawn to the title of the leading article, on alliance between Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Soviet Union. Where did you get this article, I asked. It was sent in by Comrade Mao Zedong, the comrade replied. This afternoon, he held a conference with our editors and comrades from the Central Committee Propaganda Department. He said that we must set the sights on an alliance between Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Soviet Union in international relations, and on a united front with the Japanese and Wang Jingwei inside the country. He said he had prepared an editorial and told us to publish it in our next issue. The question is a serious one. Hasn't he discussed it with the other members of the Politburo? I said I'd go and talk to him. Mao admitted that he had held the conference and added, Stalin and Dimitrov suggested an anti-fascist alliance of Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union against Germany, Italy, and Japan. Events have proved this to be false. What we want is not an alliance between Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union, but between Germany, Italy, Japan, and the Soviet Union. Why? I asked. Germany, Italy, and Japan are poor, Mao added. We will gain nothing from fighting them. In case we win, we can take nothing from them. Britain, the United States, and France are rich, especially Britain. Look at her colonies. If she is crushed, great profits will accrue from just dividing her colonies. You may accuse me of a pro-fascist line, but I do not care. In China, we want a united front with the Japanese and Wang Jingwei against Chiang Kai-shek, not an anti-Japanese front suggested by you. In short, you are wrong. Where am I wrong? I asked. We cannot overcome the Japanese, Mao said, so I fight them. We will do better to fight Chiang Kai-shek with the help of Japan and Wang Jingwei. Look at the large territories Chiang Kai-shek controls in the southwest and northwest. If he is beaten, we can get a piece of the northwest. This would be a gain. I know you will say that I am a pro-Japanese and guilty of national treason, but I do not care. I am not afraid of being a national traitor. You have no right to decide anything of such international internal importance on your own, I said. Our argument is pointless. I propose normal procedure, namely sending a telegram with your opinion to Comrades Stalin and Dimitrov and discussing the matter at a meeting of the Politburo. No such telegram can be sent now, Mao replied. The two venerable old men may fly into a rage. That would be no joking matter. Neither do I want a Politburo discussion at the present moment. Why? The situation is not yet ripe, he replied. In 6 months, events will show that I am right. Then I will send a telegram saying that I had long since made these proposals in an article in the Xinhua Bao. And Comrade Stalin and Dimitrov will reply, Comrade Mao Zedong, you were right, and we were wrong. You too, Comrade Wang Ming, will then have to admit your mistake and say, Comrade Mao Zedong, you were right, and I was wrong. At the next Politburo meeting, I will ask you not to send a telegram to Stalin and Dimitrov, and not to discuss the matter at any Politburo meeting. But what if the next 6 months prove you wrong? What then? I asked. How can I be wrong? I am certain to be right, Mao replied blandly. Our conversation continued. In short, I said, your article must not be published. It must, he said. I have held a conference, and have sent in the manuscript. If we do not publish it, I will lose face. I want the article published. And I declare here now, and will also declare to all members of the Politburo, that I alone bear the responsibility for it. Half pleading and half demanding, he had the newspaper published in the Xinhua Bao. Later, Wang Ming claims, secretly, without the knowledge of the Politburo, using the radio transmitter of the ECCPC Military Council, Mao ordered Zhao Shushi, political commissar of the New Fourth Army, to send a spokesman to negotiate cooperation against Chiang Kai-shek with representatives of the Japanese army and Wang Jingwei. Operations against the enemy were suspected, but at that time neither the Japanese nor Wang Jingwei would believe that Mao was capable of treason. They suspected a trap. As a result, no concrete records were reached. KMT propaganda, however, made the most of Mao's dealings with the enemy. Luckily, the CPC enjoyed tremendous revolutionary prestige among the people as the initiator of the anti-Japanese National Revolutionary War and the United National Anti-Japanese Front. Nobody believed there could be any national traitors like Qin Kai and Wang Jingwei among the CPC leaders. Chiang Kai-shek's attempt to use the above-mentioned facts in his anti-communist propaganda proved fruitless. In 1955, on the pretext combating a Kaokan Zhao Shushi bloc, Mao arrested Zhao Shushi and had him killed. He also took advantage of the campaign to arrest and execute Pan Hanyan, former chief of the New Fourth Army's reconnaissance, whom Zhao Shushi had sent to negotiate with the Japanese and Wang Jingwei, and Hu Hanho, who had represented the Japanese and Wang Jingwei at the negotiations. In the past, Hu Chenho had betrayed the Communist Party, but during the negotiations, Pan Hanyan persuaded him to serve our party again. Mao wanted all witnesses of his national betrayal out of the way. Since Hu Chenho was a triple agent for Chiang Kai-shek, for the Japanese and Wang Jingwei, and finally, thanks to Pan Hanyan's efforts, also a counterintelligence agent of the New Fourth Army in the Japanese and Wang Jingwei camp, in Chiang Kai-shek's camp. The content of his negotiations with Pan Hanyan was promptly relayed to the US and British secret agents in China through Chiang Kai-shek's spy agencies. In short, the American and British imperialists were given to understand that even though the Japanese had invaded China and the nation had risen to resist the aggressor, Mao was prepared to deal with Japan and become a national traitor. This meant in a different situation, he would seek an alliance with imperialism. Mao wanted to use the anti-party Cao Zhao bloc case to destroy Zhao Shushi, Pan Hanyan, Hu Chenho, and a few others. That is, all witnesses of his treasonable line of alliance with Japan and Wang Jingwei against Chiang Kai-shek, dating to 1940. Now, if you ask me, did this actually occur? Did Mao Zedong actually publish an article called On Alliance Between Italy, Japan, and Germany and the Soviet Union? And did he actually advocate alliance with the Axis powers? Well, if you ask me, it's not impossible to believe, because in 1940, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, where the Soviet Union divided Eastern Europe with Germany, And many people don't know this, but they also concluded the same agreement with Japan in 1940 to divide China into spheres of influence. We know this from Chiang Kai-shek's biography, and it was exposed in the Hong Kong press. The Soviets essentially signed an agreement with the Japanese that the Soviet sphere of influence was Outer Mongolia, Xinjiang, some parts of Qinghai, and Tibet. And the Japanese sphere of influence was Manchuria and the Central Plains, or China proper, as it was called at that time, and obviously Taiwan. So if you ask me, it's not impossible that Mao advocated this so-called pro-fascist line dealing with the Japanese, because in 1940, the KMT and CCP relations, they were at an all-time low, right? That's when the blockade started. That's when the New Fourth Army and National Revolutionary Army started fighting. That's when they got rid of the KMT emblems on their heads and the KMT uniforms and became more independent. That's when the CCP kept abandoning the United Front, and the KMT also abandoning the idea of the United Front, and the general cooperation between the CCP and KMT became worse and worse. So it's not impossible, given the circumstance, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Soviet-Japanese partition of China, weakening of the United Front. It's not impossible to suggest that this was a real event and a real policy that Mao advocated and a real article read by people. It's not impossible to say that. And we know from Pan Han that the CCP did indeed have connections with the Japanese army. As early as 1937, the 8th Army and New Fourth Army headquarters had communications directly with the IJA, and Pan Han concluded agreements with the Wang Ming regime and Japanese army, like in 1941, where both agreed to not attack each other. The Wang Ming regime and Japanese would stop the mopping up campaign, and the CCP would stop attacking the Wang Ming regime and Japanese troops. We know that these things happened, and we have evidence for it. And if you know a bit about Mao Zedong, he is a smart man, and he is in the style of every Chinese leader, that is to say, having a great power to back you, right? Look at the history of China. Sun Yat-sen, he gets funding, he tries to get funding from the Americans, he gets funding from the Japanese, he becomes essentially a base for Japanese imperialism, so to speak, because that's his main military and economic base of power, right? The Japanese government keeps funding him. So even, in 1911, Sun Yat-sen offers Manchuria to the Japanese as well as Mongolia. And then when Japan no longer wants to support Sun Yat-sen, he moves to the Comintern. Chiang Kai-shek, he gets support from the Comintern, and then from Germany, then from the West, and from America. And so Mao Zedong, he definitely wants support from a great power. He definitely wants more land. When he talks about the land Chiang Kai-shek owns in the Northwest and Southwest, one must note that the communists for a long time wanted to open up the Northwest Corridor to create a direct supply route between communist Outer Mongolia and the Chinese Soviet Republic that would be aided by the Soviet Union. That's a large part of the reason why the Long March happened and they relocated to Shanxi, because then it's easier for the Soviet Union to give them aid if there's a Northwest Corridor. And so all of this is logical, and it's not impossible that this happened. But, I'd like to hear your thoughts. What if there was really an alliance that formed between the Soviet Union, CCP, with Italy, Germany, Japan, against Chiang Kai-shek, against the United States, against France and Britain? Let me know in the comments below.